Let's talk about this story. It's on the front page of an awful lot of the papers after Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary, has actually condemned the situation where we had threats and intimidation and protests outside a secondary school in Batley in West Yorkshire after a religious studies teacher was suspended for showing a cartoon of Muhammad to a class. It was a religious studies class. He was discussing the issues over freedom of speech and blasphemy, and he showed those images that were used in the Charlie Hebdo case, of course, which led to the mass slaying there, and also, of course, bearing in mind this incident comes just a few months after a teacher in Paris was beheaded by an Islamist terrorist after he showed students images of Muhammad. The protests outside the school really, I think, looked really, frankly, quite intimidating yesterday. But should the teacher have shown those images to the pupils? And what should the reaction be? Let's talk to Mohammed Amin, who's a former chairman of the Conservative Muslim Forum and joins us now. Good morning to you, Mohammed.
Good morning, Julia.
Was the teacher wrong to show those images, or was the head teacher wrong to suspend the teacher?
I believe that this is a failed lesson and that the teacher was wrong. It's quite right that a religious studies class should discuss and debate the question of blasphemy. But at the same time, you have to respect the religious views of the pupils, and you're not entitled to force them to see things that they do not want to see.
Hold on there. I can remember being forced to see a frog being cut up in biology. I didn't really like seeing that, but I was still forced to see it as part of the education that was useful to me living in this country. As I understand it, the Quran. Now, this is the thing. This is where Islam is very different from, say, Christianity or many other religions. Where in Christianity, although people can be perceived to have blasphemed against Jesus Christ or the film The Life of Brian and the like, in Islam, it is considered to be deeply, deeply wrong and offensive to show any image, whether it's mocking or whether it's not mocking at all. It's perfectly what a non-Muslim would see as a perfectly respectful image of Prophet Muhammad. Does that apply to people who are not Muslims as well? Because it seems to me that while a Muslim would not be allowed to do that, that doesn't preclude a non-Muslim doing that.
Nobody should be forced to look at images which offend their religious beliefs. And it's not just a question about Islam. If you look at the Bible, read what the Old Testament has to say about graven images, it's actually very strong. It's quite right to teach people. The difference between you and biology is that you may have been personally squeamish about cutting up frogs, but there was nothing in your religious beliefs or your parents' religious beliefs that had anything to do with cutting up frogs.
Okay. This is the thing. Why? Because a child would be, a Muslim child may or may not be offended or unhappy or upset by seeing those images. Why does that mean that the teacher should face the risk of threats of beheading, threats to kill, have to go into hiding with his partner and their young children, suspended from the school, and the school apologising for that? Most people in this country, of any religion or none, would argue that in a free country, in a liberal democracy where we do not have a blasphemy law, teachers should be teaching children, these were 13-year-olds, not 5-year-olds, able to understand and discuss this stuff, about why religious freedom was important, but also why freedom of speech about religion is also important. Are those values not just as important as the freedom of a Muslim not to see an image of Muhammad?
Well, let's take your long list one by one. The teacher should clearly not be facing death threats. There should not be protests outside the school. However, the head teacher was quite right to raise with the teacher the question of whether his teaching was appropriate, correct, whether it properly respected the religious views of the pupils, as Gavin Williamson himself has said teaching should do. And it's quite right that he should be teaching about blasphemy. That does not mean that he's entitled to force children to look at images that they don't want to look at.
I find this notion of forcing children. I mean, if he was holding the children's heads and saying, I'm putting this image right in front of their heads and saying, you will look at this image and you will like it, I think you'd have a point. If, however, in a conversation about while living in a liberal, free democracy, in a country which does not have a blasphemy law, why you should have a conversation about these are the images that were shown in the Charlie Hebdo magazine, which led to people of Islamic faith and extremists being so upset about this that they thought it was justified and justifiable for them to shoot dead those people. And why, when a teacher in Paris a few months ago in October showed similar images, it was felt justified by the man who beheaded him that it was necessary. That you have to see the images to be able to have the conversation? Or are you saying that Muslim children in this country are uniquely incapable of understanding these issues? Because I think that's pretty patronising.
You do not have to see the images to understand the conversation. If the teacher had said to the pupils, you can find the images here, you go and look there, or even if he'd said to the remember, neither you nor I were there. If he'd said, in 2 minutes' time, I'm going to hold up these images. You can look away now if you don't want to see them. And I'll tell you once I've stopped showing the images, and then we can carry on the discussion. That would have been fine. I don't know exactly how this class was conducted, but I don't have any reason to believe it was conducted that way. As far as I understand from the press reports, he simply projected the images without giving the children the appropriate warning.
Well, you said we would regard that as an appropriate warning. I would say that actually you would be excluding those children if they didn't see that. But do you think that would have been acceptable for others who've protested? We know there were crowds of young men looking like they were in their 20s, didn't look like they were probably parents or pupils at the school, crowding outside the school. Looked quite intimidating to me. But also certain groups, one particular charity that has spoken up about this, and people saying that this is the bare minimum, that the teacher being suspended was the bare minimum, or even sacked. We know what the threats are. We know where this goes because some extremists will take this to the extreme. There's a difference between asking people to be respectful and polite and show good manners to people, and people being fearful of even raising this issue because they don't want to be beheaded, because some religious extremist would think that was an appropriate response. Do you not think that actually a teacher has a duty to educate all the children in their class, but particularly the Muslim children in that class, about this danger to religious freedom?
The teacher has an absolute duty to educate, but I reject your assumption that the education cannot be done without forcing the children to look at the images.
What happens if you look at that image? I mean, I can understand people want to obey their religious tenets. I get that and respect that. Even as an atheist, I expect people's rights is a very important freedom in a democracy. But seeing that image, is that's there's a difference between a child seeing that image and a child being told to show that image or draw that image themselves, surely.
It's a matter for each person to decide the religious implications for themselves. There are ultra-Orthodox Jews who will not look at images of women. Yeah. In Israel, you get posters at bus stops being blacked out by Haredi Jews because they think it's wrong to have images of women. People's religious beliefs vary. I don't have a problem with the Charlie Hebdo cartoons. Just read Charlie, but every person has the right to their own religious beliefs. And if somebody does not want to look at cartoons of the images of the Prophet Muhammad, he has a right not to look at them.
Okay. Does the teacher, though, have a right to actually freedom of expression in their teaching, I would ask?